Folks, if you've been following along with my rehab, I appreciate it, and welcome back. And if you are new here and this is your first time, welcome. I'm Tom. I play minor league baseball, currently for the New York Mets, and at the moment I am rehabbing from Tommy John surgery. So I guess technically I play rehab more than I play baseball as of right now. Up to this point, I've been trying to document my rehab as sort of like a weekly vlog update, but I really just don't think it's working that well. Partially because I don't really like talking straight into a camera while I do things, and I'm not very good at it either. Like in this clip, just listen.
So it might not seem super important or special. This is a really important step to getting back towards throwing.
I don't express a full thought in that clip, and I needed that clip to start this video. It's the only one I have from that day. Other than my awkwardness on camera, the other issue is that the progress during rehab is often really slow, and going week by week doesn't show it all that well. Going slightly slower on a band exercise as I got better at it throughout the week is barely noticeable, but I bet you can see the difference between me doing an exercise for the first time since surgery and then doing it a month later. So instead of just 1 week, this video covers a period of 6 weeks leading up to when I'm supposed to throw a baseball for the first time since surgery. Now, what I should be saying here is that today I'm 12 weeks out of surgery and beginning the progression of throwing various objects that leads up to throwing a baseball again. This progression is 3 weeks of two-handed plyos, or basically med ball throws, and then 3 weeks of one-handed plyos, which are meant to mimic the components of a throwing motion, but isolated in a way that my arm and new ligament can get used to them safely. This is exciting, obviously, but it also puts me in a bit of a bind. It now means that there is a timer on the actual measurable strength of my arm and getting it back to where it was before surgery. We have a couple methods of measuring different facets of arm strength here. This one is called a Kangatech since it's Australian. You press into these pads and it gives you your force output. For me, shoulder internal and external rotation are most important here. And then, of course, there is grip strength. We do a series of these tests in spring training to get a baseline. In case you get hurt, these are numbers to get back to. For me, they are 230 newtons on internal rotation strength, on external rotation strength, 220 newtons, and on grip strength, 140 pounds at 0 degrees and 90 degrees, which just means at my side and then up by my shoulder. And my first test was bad. Like, even when you consider that it was my first test, it was still bad. My PT and I had a discussion about this, and we came to the conclusion that my body might just take a little bit longer to heal, and that sucks, but there's not much I can do about it. And it's not guaranteed to be a setback yet. I still have time to move the numbers in the right direction. In the meantime, I have some new things to do to distract me from my concerns, my two-hand plyo throws. So I have some chest pass, some overhead taps, and a little hip toss. And these felt a little weird at first, but overall, that all went away after the first few reps, and it felt really good to just throw something again. After the first week, I switched to using actual med balls and added in 2 more exercises, a side-to-side overhead tap, and then a scoop toss. And as I got more comfortable with these, I was able to put more effort into them, which was especially nice for the hip toss since it was one of my favorite ways to work on my motion. It is one of the reasons that I started throwing harder in college, or at least I think it is. So it was really, really nice to get to do these again and sort of feel out the lower body mechanics related to throwing that I haven't done in months. The next time I tested my shoulder strength, it was good and bad. The good is that my external rotation strength was pretty much back to normal.
Testing yourself?
Yep. But unfortunately, that's the least important of the 3 tests that I am doing. Shoulder external rotation is the absolute bottom, followed by grip strength and shoulder internal rotation on the top. This is not to say that shoulder external rotation strength isn't important, it certainly is, but nothing happened to my rotator cuff in this surgery, so there's no reason that my shoulder would be any less strong than it was beforehand. In fact, when I'm done with all of this rehab, it should be stronger than it was before I started. Now, on the other hand, shoulder internal rotation, the most important, went slightly up on this test, but only a little bit. And progress is very rarely linear, but even if it was, and I kept up this rate of improvement, I still probably wouldn't be ready on time, but I wouldn't be too far off either. At this point, I sat down and tried to look at how I could attack the areas that I was still weak in. As for shoulder internal rotation, the most important of them, there really isn't anything. Because it involves a lot of the same stress as throwing, if my elbow can't handle the stress, then my body just isn't ready for it yet, and there really isn't anything that I can do about it. No matter what I do, I can't really make my new ligament or my bones heal any faster, unless somebody has some kind of bone healing juice. The answer for my weak grip strength was pretty obvious once I thought about it for a minute. When I had surgery, along with getting the gift of a fresh new UCL made from a piece of my hamstring, my ulnar nerve had also been moved. As a result, I have a lot less feeling in my pinky and ring finger on my right hand than I do in my middle and index fingers. Turns out nerves, a lot like people, don't really like being forced out of where they live. And they're not completely numb, but hey, that's the wrong way. Thank you. Now, like I said, they're not completely numb. I would say that my ring finger is at about 90% of full feeling, and my pinky is at probably 70 to 75%. Now, there's probably not very much I can do about the rate at which the feeling comes back, but instead it just means I have to be really deliberate about trying to get them stronger again. Instead of spending equal amounts of time on each finger when I do this finger grip thing, instead I had to focus more on my pinky and ring fingers, since having 4 relatively strong fingers to grip with instead of 2 good ones and 2 sort of okay ones seems like it should lead to better grip strength numbers, since 4 is more than 2, at least according to my extensive mathematical research. After a week or two of that, my grip strength started to creep up, not quite to where I needed to be to test at, but getting within striking distance. Along with testing better, the muscles responsible for moving your pinky and ring fingers start way up in your elbow, and so strengthening them is probably going to be beneficial for the safety of my new UCL, which is one of the reasons that this grip strength test is important. Around this time, I also started to close the gap in strength between my left and right arm in the weight room. The difference had been 40 or more pounds on upper body exercises when I started lifting again, but now it was down to 15, even 10 on the really good days, which is great because holding heavier weights is also good for my grip strength and also just makes me feel more normal. Now, just 3 weeks away from my intended throwing date, I have another exciting addition to my program, one-handed plyos. Like I said before, these are isolated components of the throwing motion so that my arm can acclimate to each of them one at a time. These actually felt really good, and that made me a lot more confident about being able to throw on time. The remaining issue, though, is my shoulder internal rotation strength. Another test and it was still improving, but still a ways to go with 3 weeks left. I was also allowed to start working my shoulder strengthening stuff through a greater range of motion, which looks weird but is very important as I get ready to start throwing again. We also started testing my shoulder strength twice a week just to make sure that my shoulder doesn't have Garfield syndrome and just hates Mondays when I normally test. This is not to be confused with James Garfield syndrome, where you die due to the incompetence of almost every single person around you. Seriously, as soon as you are done watching this video, look up how President James Garfield died. If you know nothing else at all about American history, please just learn this one thing about how our 20th president died. And it was in this second test of the week that I had a breakthrough. I tied my spring training test for internal rotation, and it was still 50 newtons under my max, but 40 newtons better than my last test and a definite step in the right direction. I also beat my spring training numbers for grip strength on both hands, but forgot to record it because I didn't expect to, and so these are similar numbers from the following day. My legs are starting to hit their stride again strength-wise as well, as they're about 8 weeks out from the minor knee surgery that I had a few months after I had elbow surgery. And so I have been celebrating that fact by lifting heavy circles. And I've also progressed to some things that almost look like throwing as I get closer and closer to the day I'm actually supposed to throw a baseball. Here I'm throwing a ball under the constraint that I'm half kneeling and my arm is only allowed to move like I'm one of those waving lucky cat statue things. And those felt alright, so a few days later I got to move on to basically just lightly throwing a plyo ball from a half kneeling position. My arm was definitely a little bit sore after this, which is not surprising given the fact it's the first thing even remotely similar to throwing that I've done in 4 months. But the soreness wasn't that bad that it kept me from doing anything else, so I wasn't overly concerned about it. Now we come to Monday, a week before I'm supposed to throw again, and I had a great day. First off, I did some actual plyos outside, some reverse throws, and some very light pivot picks that you can see here, but they felt and looked way, way better than I was expecting. Even without much effort, my shoulder looks loose, and I look pretty comfortable throwing the ball, even if that doesn't really reflect how I felt at first. Then I went back inside and tested my shoulder, and I set another post-surgical best for internal rotation at
217.
just 13 newtons shy of my all-time best, or just under about 3 pounds of force. On my second to last test before my intended date to throw, I reached about 95% of my best ever numbers on what is the most important test that I'm doing. My arm was, again, a little sore when I woke up the next day, but I'm starting to think that'll simply be the norm until I've been throwing for a bit and my arm is used to it again. And it mostly went away after moving around a little and going through some rehab exercises. I threw some more plyos throughout the week, and my arm continued to feel better while doing so, and on Friday I even mixed in a few from a split stance so that I could get a little bit closer to the feeling of throwing a baseball, since the next time I threw after this, I would be. Then I went back inside to do my last shoulder strength test, and I started off by blowing my external rotation number out of the water. I didn't record that rep, but you can see it down here. Now for internal rotation. My PT and I had more or less agreed that the last test I did was good enough for me to throw, but I wanted to tie my previous best just for the sake of doing so before I threw. I'm a very competitive person, and that doesn't change just because the guy I'm competing against is me from earlier. And I came close, but no cigar. 227.5 newtons, not even a full pound of force, but certainly enough to make me feel like my arm is as strong as it was before. For my last test before I throw on Monday, I did one more round of grip strength. I have already passed the benchmarks I needed for this, but it's always good to make sure that it wasn't just a fluke, and it wasn't. And with that, I have hit all of the testing numbers I needed to in order to be allowed to throw again. And with that, all that's left is to actually throw. So, I'll see you when I see you. Nah, I'm just kidding. I threw today. It went well. It felt really good. So, that ends phase 1 of rehab, and now phase 2 starts.